This is Oshner Baptist, formerly Memorial Medical Center, and it was the site of a hellish nightmare in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina.
It's Monday, August 29th.
The rain is picking up, and you can see these definitive bands now.
The day that will change life as we know it.
When disaster strikes, who do we save first? And who do we leave behind? In days after Hurricane Katrina, one New Orleans hospital found itself completely cut off from power, without rescue, and without a plan. Staff were forced to make impossible decisions. Some of those choices would be later investigated as crimes. This is a story about how systems fail, and how people try to do the right thing with no really right answer. Let's talk about Memorial Medical Center. Memorial Medical Center was a 317-room hospital in uptown New Orleans. So, today I'm going to be talking about Memorial Medical Center and the tragic events that happened during Hurricane Katrina and days after, what all these patients, doctors, nurses, families had to deal with after this tragic hurricane. In preparation for this video, I did listen to Sherry Frank's book, 5 Days at Memorial, where she did document and heavily research and talk to people who were affected and who were victims of this hurricane and this tragedy. So if you want to find out more information, I definitely recommend listening to her book or reading it. And I will link everything that I use in this video, notes, sources, everything in the description below. And if you're new to my channel, I make videos about anything I want, honestly. I'm just deep diving into internet topics and things that I think are interesting. So if you are interested in that, please subscribe and comment down below what other videos or what other topics you want me to cover. Let's get into the video. On the surface, it was just another hospital in a storm-prone region, but it had serious vulnerabilities. Their flooding system was not ideal for a hurricane whatsoever. Their backup generators were located in the basement where floodwaters would destroy them. By August 28, 2009, Hurricane Katrina made downfall. The hospital was filled with staff, patients, people from the surrounding area seeking shelter during this hurricane, and it was over 1,800 people that were inside the hospital. Hurricane Katrina made landfall on August 29th. Memorial itself withstood rain, wind, but when levees failed, the real disaster began. Water surrounded the building, rising fast. Power failed. The basement flooded, knocking out the backup generators. Without air conditioners, temperatures rose over 100 degrees. Electrical medical equipment stopped working. There was no elevator access. Memorial became a hot, dark, and agonizing place to be. But before we get into the legal case and the tragedies that happened, we have to go back a little bit to talk about why Memorial was doomed to start in the first place. Let's start with the levees. And if you don't know what a levee is, it's basically long walls or embankments help to keep water out from flooding. They're kind of like really giant barriers between a city and a body of water. And since New Orleans is at sea level, sometimes below sea level, these are very important to make sure that water doesn't come flooding into the city. But ultimately, that is what happened. The problem was that these levees were actually never going to hold. Engineers warned for years that New Orleans was a disaster waiting to happen, especially in a time like this with a very aggressive hurricane.
But in terms of the nuts and bolts of the levees breaking and that kind of thing, what should people have in mind as they look back on this incident?
They should be angry at the Army Corps of Engineers for building shoddy levees. It was a disastrously built system. It breached in over 50 different places. The media naturally covered the 3 major breaches, and the city of New Orleans filled up like a bowl with water. 80% of the city flooded.
In fact, the Times Pouquin ran a whole series back in 2002, 3 years before Hurricane Katrina even happened, called Washed Away. It laid out exactly what would happen if a major storm hit. The city would flood, hospitals would be overwhelmed, and people would die waiting for help that never came. And that's exactly what happened. But it just wasn't bad luck, it was bad planning. New Orleans is built in a bowl. A lot of people did not have cars, did not have money to evacuate, and did not have anywhere else to go. And emergency plans just didn't account for that. Hospitals, they weren't a priority either. Memorial and Life Care being the for-profit company that rented out this space in the hospital, weren't even designated evacuation sites. And yet they were full of some of the sickest patients in the state. The government response, from the local to the federal level, was chaotic at best and negligent at worst. FEMA was slow, underprepared, and underfunded. State plans were outdated. No one knew who was in charge. People were dying while agencies argued over logistics. In Sherry Frank's book, in about 20% in, she started explaining how the hospital was trying to get people to come help them. They reached out to hospitals in Dallas. They reached out to hospitals, outside of New Orleans to come help save them. And instead of coming to help, they literally were like, I'm getting bombarded with too many emails. I'm going to have you reach out to someone else. While these people are suffering in a hurricane, people are telling them, oh, we don't really know who's in control here. We don't know who, they didn't know if FEMA was supposed to help. They didn't know.
There was certainly a lot to criticize. It was a failure of government at every level. The scale of Hurricane Katrina overwhelmed the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. They were not prepared for a crisis of that size and a dislocation of that many people.
They didn't know if evacuation people, what the priority was. There was no big, real system in place, which is one of the big flaws in this situation, is there was just no organization into what happened when it comes to preparing for a hurricane. Meanwhile, George W. Bush was photographed playing guitar in a fundraiser in California. And when he finally addressed the disaster, he said, "Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job," referring to FEMA Director Michael Brown. That quote really did not age well in this situation. If I can find a clip of him saying that, I will insert it right here.
I want to thank you all and Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job. The FEMA director's working 24.
And here's something a lot of people don't realize. Memorial and Life Care weren't even part of the same organization. Like I was saying, Life Care was a for-profit space leasing inside of Memorial. So the evacuation started, no one really knew who was responsible for the patients. Was it Memorial Hospital, the really big organization, hospital structure, or was it Life Care, the for-profit company that rented out the space with these patients? Who was responsible for finding their evacuation protocols? So one thing that was explained in the book is that during this time period, hospitals had a kind of gold star system for making sure they were prepared for emergencies like a hurricane, but they were honestly not really detailed, and a lot of hospitals in New Orleans met standards, quote unquote, but they really didn't have actual processes in place for if a hurricane happened. Okay, I'm so sorry my camera cut off because my SD card was full. Let's get back into the video. Like I was saying in the book, that it explained that hospitals at this time really didn't have a way to really verify that their evacuation and other emergency management policies were effective. And a lot of them just had this company that they would hire to kind of verify hey, yeah, these procedures you have are fine, you should be okay in an emergency. But these policies and procedures really, they said yeah, this will work, but it wasn't tested. There was no really federal regulation. It was a for-profit company that was giving these tests. So that kind of really showed that nobody really had a checks and balances type of way of making sure that these hospitals and places that people are getting cared for at had effective policies in place for major events like a hurricane. So by the time the floodwaters rose and the power failed, the people inside Memorial were already abandoned by systems that were supposed to protect them. And that brings us back to the central question. What do we expect from healthcare workers when everything else has already failed? Because inside Memorial, people were trying to save lives, but some would later be accused of taking them. For days, rescue was sporadic and poorly coordinated. No one knew when help was coming. FEMA and state agencies were overwhelmed. Communication was failing across the city. Memorial staff used flashlights, makeshift stretchers, and boats trying to evacuate patients. As resources dwindled, staff made hard choices on who to evacuate first. Those who could walk went first, then patients in stable condition. Those with DNR or do not resuscitate orders were deemed least likely to survive and were moved to the back of the line. On the 7th floor of Memorial was a separate long-term care hospital run by Life Care. This was a space that Life Care was renting out that these patients were in. These were some of the sickest patients in the building. Many were immobile and dependent on machines. Life Care had no evacuation plan in place. Days into the crisis, 20 patients died in Life Care. Some state investigators later alleged that certain patients were euthanized, giving lethal doses of morphine and other sedatives to end their suffering. And this is honestly when that debate of did these doctors and nurses do what was best for their patients, and asking the question whose fault is this, because field in general did not have a triage type of plan in place. So literally these doctors and nurses had to dictate, are they going to save these people and do the best that they can while fighting for their own lives during this hurricane? Like, these doctors and nurses, it wasn't just them. It was their patients that they were taking care of. They had to worry about their family back home that were also fighting this hurricane, and also about themselves. So this isn't really a black and white, they were murderers, they weren't murderers. This situation is tragic in general, and thinking about what these people had to make decisions on is very heartbreaking. One family member later spoke to the media saying that she found it strange that her mother had passed away the way that she did, and she really couldn't get any information on what happened to her mom. This is where Dr. Anna Pou enters the story. She was an ear, nose, and throat doctor at Memorial. Witnesses claim that she administered these injections. Pou always maintained that she did this in best interest of her patients, and that she was not, she did not have any ill intent when making this decision. She really wanted to do what was best for her patients. After the floodwaters receded, the bodies left behind Memorial raised red flags. In total, 45 people died in the hospital. Autopsies revealed heavy levels of morphine and midazepam in several patients who had not been prescribed them. And I'm going to actually look up what midazepam is. I know what morphine is, but I actually don't know. It says midazepam is a medication primarily used for sedation, reduces anxiety, and causes memory loss before and during medical procedures. So I think by them giving them morphine, which is a painkiller, and midazepam, which is used for sedation, I think you can kind of tell that these doctors, my opinion, like I'm saying, this is my opinion, these doctors were just doing the best that they could. And a lot of these patients were elderly people who were already in pain from the conditions that they were suffering with, on top of being in a 100-degree hospital, not having a lot of food and water, because a lot of their supplies, a lot of the people were told, oh, you only need food for 1 to 3 days, when they were in this hospital for 5 days. So there was no win-win in this situation, honestly. Dr. Pou and 2 nurses were arrested in 2006. In 2007, a grand jury declined to indict any of them. The case became one of the most controversial legal battles in post-Katrina New Orleans. Many saw Pou as a scapegoat, a doctor trying to do her best under impossible conditions. Others questioned how decisions were made and who had the authority to decide who lived and who died. Like I was saying, these doctors and nurses, there was no really way of deciding, what does triage care look like? How do we decide who we're going to get out of this hospital first? There was no standard protocol and procedures. They really were just like, well, I guess we're just going to use the people that can walk because they can get out the easiest. Then we're going to do the people who are, in critical care, but they can still get out fairly easily. And then last, they picked the people who were on a do not resuscitate. And there was no way, doctors and nurses had to take on that burden and making that decision. There was no document or no legal thing that was like, okay, well, these are the people you pick, this is what you do. It was like they had to make the decision on their own. So this case really isn't about individuals. It's about a real system failure. The hospitals had no disaster evacuation plan. Backup generators were not available. FEMA and state officials were slow and disorganized. Life Care and Memorial Medical had conflicting understandings of responsibility. A lot of people have debated whether triage during disasters should allow for palliative sedation when there's no hope of survival, and who should be empowered to make the call. The post-Katrina reforms came slowly, but they were necessary. Dr. Pou helped pass in Louisiana that provides civil immunity to healthcare workers during disasters, excluding cases of gross negligence and misconduct. Those laws aim to prevent healthcare workers from being held liable in similar situations, but also spark debates on what should be considered acceptable in life and death situations during extreme events. The failure of local, state, and federal authorities to properly coordinate to the response of the hurricane was a significant part of the disaster. When the storm first hit, local emergency services were overwhelmed. As the days dragged on, the lack of support and leadership only worsened. FEMA's response was slow and disorganized, and it's clear that the systems in place weren't equipped to handle a catastrophe of this magnitude.
Governor Blanco, you were the first female governor in the history of Louisiana. Do you think that this complicated your relationship with the Bush White House?
Complicated the White House piece of it, because when the national media started jumping on him and for the delays, and he couldn't FEMA to produce the desired results in a timely fashion in time. It took until Thursday morning. The storm hit on Monday. I became the logical scapegoat. He told Time magazine and the Washington Post that the reason for the federal delay was that the governor of Louisiana had not signed the disaster declaration till after landfall. We all know it was a lie because every media outlet in Louisiana announced it on Friday night and printed it on Saturday morning.
I honestly think that this situation comes down to nobody knew what was going on. The local government, the state government, the federal government, they had no real communications with each other. There were no real big laws about, like, in case of an extreme weather disaster, people can't get out. People are in hospitals who are in critical condition. Like, what do we do? How do we get these people out? How do we figure out the best way to help make these people comfortable if these are their last days, sadly? Like, there was no proper communication between these levels of authority. The National Guard was delayed in arriving, and the communications was nearly impossible between hospital and government authorities. There were no plans in place to evacuate healthcare facilities, and New Orleans was left to fend for itself. While stories of systematic failures and legal battles dominate the narrative, the personal accounts from families of the victims are the real heart of this tragedy.
Neighbors came together in the lower Ninth Ward to remember the nearly 1,400 lives lost in Hurricane Katrina. Thursday marked 19 years since the Category 3 storm made landfall in Plaquemines Parish and Hancock County and devastated New Orleans, to the point where many residents say the city is just not the same anymore. Don Richard says while so many people are trying to forget the hurricane, it's impossible to forgive it.
I don't think anybody, especially the doctors and nurses in this situation. I know there was another doctor during this time, Dr. Brown King. I can't remember his name. I'll put some information on the screen or in the description below, but he was another doctor at this hospital who actually left right before the hurricane happened, or right before they decided that they were going to start euthanizing patients who were on DNRs and who really didn't have a chance of evacuating. He had left. He was like, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to euthanize these patients just because they can't get out, they can't be evacuated. So instead of him staying there and watching, he literally left the hospital. He was like, yeah, I'm done. I'm leaving. So honestly, you can see this case from both different sides of, like, nobody really had the quote-unquote right answer. They really just did what was best for them and their patients. The pain felt by these families speaks to the deep emotional cost of this tragedy, and in many ways, it's a reminder that when systems fail, real people suffer the consequences. In years since Memorial Center eventually reopened under a new name and ownership, the lessons learned from the disaster led to new protocols for hospital disaster preparedness. However, the legal consequences and questions about the ethics of life and death decisions in such extreme circumstances linger. Dr. Anna Pou continues to be a patient safety advocate, working to change the laws that govern how medical professionals respond during disasters. Her work has ensured that healthcare workers cannot be sued for actions taken in times of crisis, as long as it doesn't involve gross negligence. 5 Days of Memorial, which now has been adapted into an Apple TV series in 2022. I do want to watch the series and just see how it not compares, but, like, I've listened to her book and I want to see how that is on screen. So if anybody's watched the show, let me know how it is. But yeah, the story of memorial care doesn't really have a clear hero or clear villain. Everyone had to make decisions on what happened, and it showed how systems fail and how these everyday, ordinary people who were just trying to survive made decisions that they thought were best. In the end, Memorial forces us to ask not just what we would do in a disaster, but what we should expect from the systems that protect us. And that is all for today's video about Memorial Medical Center and all the events that happened during Hurricane Katrina and what happened to these people. I just want to say thank you for watching this video. If you found it informative, make sure you subscribe for more deep dives into events that happened, and I will dig deep into them and really make a video kind of explaining what happened. If anybody has any suggestions, any feedback, anything about this video, please let me know in the comments, because this is my first time making this kind of video, so I want to make sure I'm doing it in the best way for my audience. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all those things, and I'll see you guys in my next video.